All right. Right. So moving on to our next topic for today. We're doing this MFTF Best Practices series, and this is the third one in the series. It's about how to write good selectors. So what I'll do in this session would be I'll walk you through some guidelines that we could use to write good selectors, and also walk you through some examples in our code, and try and refactor some bad selectors and try to make them a little more robust than they actually are. Whenever you're writing UI functional automation tests, automated tests, we often have the need to go and find elements on the HTML page, and the way we do it is using selectors. There are multiple ways, or tons of different ways to write selectors to get to a specific element on the page. But some are less reliable and more flaky and error-prone to changes in the application, and some are good. So I'll focus on some examples, some good and bad examples in this session, and see how we can come up with some ground rules or some standards to write good selectors. So what is a selector? So it's an address to a UI element on the DOM. It's usually a unique identifier to an element. This element could be anything. It could be an input field. It could be a button, table, div, etc. So where does it reside? So if you look at this example here, you have an admin login form section, and you have all elements defined inside of it. You see a selector attribute, and that's where we specify the unique identifier for elements. So this selector could either be a CSS or XPath. So why are good selectors important? So if you look at the way MFTF tests are orchestrated, so MFTF tests call action groups, which orchestrate actions. These actions refer to elements, and elements have selectors. So selectors are by far the most reused component of functional testing. Excuse me. So they can be called as foundation of tests. So if selector is unstable, you end up building anything that you build on top of it would inherit that instability. So how do you go about identifying selectors? So there are two ways. One is using the default built-in developer tools of web browsers, and you could also use some browser add-ons like Live Editor, Less and Sass, and XPath Helper. So order of preference. So if you look at the DOM, you'd see an element has multiple attributes, so which means you can build selectors in multiple ways. However, it's always a good practice to follow a certain order of preference when it comes to usage of these attributes to select elements. So the first on the list is ID. So ID is always the best option. So if you have an ID for an element, go ahead and use that. However, we say that all elements may not have an ID attribute. So in that case, look for something which is unique to that element. For example, it could be a name attribute or a class or anything else. The next comes CSS selectors. So they're a little more complex than just identifying it using a singular attribute. They are usually a combination of attributes like class name or maybe even some hierarchy of the elements of the DOM. And the final one in the list would be XPath selectors. So the reason why we have placed CSS over XPath is something that I'll be explaining in the next slide. So CSS and XPath, they are a part of a same category because they use combination. They're a little more complex than the first and the second one. So if nothing above works, you can always ask developer for a unique ID or a class.
Can I add into this order of preference? On the first place, yes, it is ID by definition. It is unique. It should be a single unique ID on the page. So yes, it is very reliable. But in my opinion, we should have here number 0 where you specify something like, if you know this element has some attribute, ID or name or data class, whatever else, which is used in your application for some references. Let's say this is your login form input username. You will have their name, attribute, username inside. It is much better to use name attribute in your functional test instead of ID, just because in Magento code, when you send this post request to Magento, your array will be built using this name attribute. And inside Magento code, everyone will rely on this name attribute. And it's not very likely that someone will change this attribute name, username to something else, just because developer will have to change Magento application code directly to another place. So every time you build a selector, try to talk to developers if they're acceptable, and ask them what is the best selector. What do you use in application in your extension to identify this field?
That's a good point. So if you try to look at the DOM of Magento of any web page, you always see ID as an alphanumeric character. So they're kind of auto-generated. So it may not be reliable in certain cases to just look at IDs. So yeah, so it's good to be mindful of picking elements which may not end up changing very often. So I think name would be a good candidate. Right, so CSS versus XPath. So this has always been a very subjective topic of discussion. So when do you use CSS and when XPath? So we are recommending to have CSS as your go-to selector. The reason being they are usually faster than XPath. They are much more shorter. If you try to like compare a CSS versus an XPath for an element, you'll always see that CSS is a lot more concise. It's easier. The syntax is easier. It's also heavily used in development. However, in case of certain scenarios that cannot be accomplished using CSS, for example, searching text, moving up the DOM, you could always rely on XPath. So this may not be a de facto standard, but it's always so. In case we are trying to like enforce the more usage of CSS compared to XPath, and use XPath seldomly only when it's really required. So writing good selectors. We look at some examples, some good and bad examples on and some pitfalls that we can avoid while building selectors. So the first one is copying CSS and XPaths. So dev tools offer you the flexibility of generating CSS and XPath using a right click. So you most often you would end up with selectors that look like the first two. You'd see it's extremely layout oriented. It's lengthy. You have too many unnecessary details in them. You would be able to identify elements with a much shorter selector, like the last example. So yes, avoid directly copying and using the dev tools generated CSS or XPaths in your code. So avoid being too specific. So a good selector is always a balance between strict and loose matching of elements in the DOM. So try not to be extremely specific. So if you look at the first example, you have like too many information in there, which clearly can be avoided. You don't have to have the entire hierarchy of elements defined as a part of your selector. So try not to be too strict with the layout information, and try to be a little more concise and just have enough information to uniquely identify the element, as in the last example. So at the same time, don't be too general. It may lead to multiple element matches. So if you look at these, you see they could end up with multiple matches on the screen. So it's always a good practice to go check your selector in the console and see if you don't have multiple elements being matched as part of that. So yes, don't be too general. Loose matching is also not preferred. Avoid hardcore indices. So very often when we are working with elements like maybe table objects like table or unordered lists, you would have ended up identifying certain elements using positions. So index-based approach we may not be able to avoid it completely, but it's always good to parameterize them through tests instead of hard coding them. So this will increase their reusability and also allow you the flexibility of finding elements positions.
Can I show something on this?
Mm-hmm.
And this is for a second. Can you stop sharing for a second?
Sorry.
Sorry for interruption. So guys, I want to show you how, on example, how do we work with Magento grids and how you can avoid using indices in your task which relies on grid actions. Let me show you some section we created a while ago in grid. No, not this one. The grid. Yep. So we have two grids in Magento. One is legacy, which came to Magento 2, if I'm not mistaken, even from Magento 1. And second one is UI component grid. So both of these grids located under proper modules. The new one, which everyone recommends to use, located under UI module, and the old one located under backend module. So let me show you the example of selector, which I use when I want to find a proper row in this grid without using indices. So here is two selectors, one called row template strict and second one is row template. So what this selector is about, they start in with some context. So we're gonna look at table and not in full table, but we're gonna look at T-body where the data located, and then I'm gonna find the row I need by looking at that some column has text, and I will specify what text I'm looking for. So basically what will happen, if I need to find in product grid concrete product, let's imagine I have 10 products and I need to find the 7th product. I will not use indices in this case. I will not specify open me product number 7 because I know that is 7. What I will do, I will use this selector and I will specify, instead of this template, I will specify SKU of product. And it doesn't matter in which position your product located. It can be number 1, number 2, 3, 4, 10, whatever. It will find the proper row in my grid, and I can open this product. I can, I don't know, check what is located in this row, whatever action I need to do. I have this selector directed to proper line. So please use those selectors. Column, that's something if you need to find the concrete column with data. So you can read those selectors and understand what they are doing. The difference between raw template strict and raw template is that in first case, when it says strict, it means that at some TD in table, you must have a strict string to find. So if you are searching for SKU, it is better to use raw template strict. But if you want to find something you are not sure the full name, or you don't know it, or maybe sometimes it happens when in data grids you have TD with a lot of spaces before some data with some formatting, so you can use template. So what it will do, it will check that at some TD, this text you specifies contains in this TD. Not the full TD has this text, but some piece of this TD contains this data. So that's about this one I showed you. This is admin legacy data grid, which is still somewhere present in Magenta. And I also have the same section for new data grid. Filter, data grid table. Yep. So under UI module sections, you can find admin data grid table section, and you can find here two last selectors, which is raw template strict and raw template similar. Similar idea to the previous one with a small change, because how that grid looks, it looks a little bit different from outdated. So please use those and make sure you are not using any indices in your task, because sometimes we have a problem when we run those tests on CI/CD, and some test creates million of products, and you just cannot be sure in which position your product will be located, or any other entity. So please use them. And another good practice with grids and selecting proper element in a grid, filter your grid before you trying to open the product or any entity in this grid. So just type into filters whatever you're trying to search, and then you will have less products on the page, so you will be able to find it. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
All right.
Sorry.
Oh. Right. So let me go back to my presentation. Right, so yes, avoid, as Alex said, avoid hard coding indices, try to parameterize whenever possible. Be technology agnostic. So we've often come across attributes which are specific to the underlying UI frameworks. For example, data bind. It's an attribute that is exposed by Knockout.js. So it's always a good practice to stay clear from such attributes which are specific to these frameworks, because if there's any refactoring happening on the front end, and if these frameworks go away, all your selectors would end up breaking. So instead, rely on generic or maybe the default attributes that you have for elements. So using anchors. A lot of times you may not have unique identifiers for elements that you wanna pick from the HTML page. So using anchors would be a good approach to just to build out your selectors in a hierarchical format. So for example, in this case, you have a sign-in button, and the sign-in button has a class called login. And say if you have multiple matches of this class on the page, so this may not be a good identifier to use. So in that case, the best approach would be to go just one level up in the DOM and look for an anchor parent element. An anchor parent element should have a unique identifier. And in this case, in this example, you have an ID for this form called login form. So that's an anchor element in this case. Then you can target the child element in this way. So this is a good practice to make sure that we don't have like a very long hierarchy of elements in the selector to get to a child element. So you're going from parent to child in this case. The next example would be the reverse. Say you need to identify this row, and this row doesn't have any attributes linked to it. So what we could do is try looking for a unique internal element, or maybe a child anchor element. In this case, it would be a span. You're trying to use text, contains text, Jerry Seinfeld, and then jump to the parent element using parent. So this is a reverse of the previous example. You're using a child anchor element to get to a parent element which doesn't have a unique identifier. So what I'll do is, so any questions so far, what we'll do is we'll jump onto some examples from code and see how we can refactor. Now before that, if there are any questions, feel free to ask them. All right. Right. So we look at some examples of maybe poorly written elements, element selectors in our code. So we look at this example here from the admin create new product attribute section. So if you look at this section, you see elements with extremely lengthy selectors. So we'll try and see if there is a way to optimize them and try and refactor them with just the required attributes that would be needed to uniquely identify this element. So let's say for example, attribute code. So it looks like this is a type of input. This is of type input, and you have this selector, you have this class, and it's getting to this input tag with name called attribute code. Let's try and find it on our application. Try to log in. So it looks like this is on the new product attribute page. Log in. So I'm going to catalog, going to products. You go to add product. So I'm trying to get to the attribute page here. Right, so I'll add an attribute and try to locate that element on this page. From create new attribute. Okay, so it looks like this is the element that we're looking for. We'll try to inspect this element. Right, so if you look at this DOM, you'll see this element has an ID. And as we talked earlier, this is an alphanumeric key. It's not reliable to use this ID because it may end up changing at some point. So we have an attribute name, which looks like it could be used. So I'll try to build the selector here. So since we don't have to recognize this element using text or anything, I would rely on CSS selector to do it. Try to construct this code. Right. So in this case, you'll see there are two matches to this element. So you would have to go a level up to see if we can narrow down to the element that we are looking for. So if you look, the immediate parent has a class called admin field control. So let me try using that. So I'm going to modify the selector to use admin field control. Okay. Right, so it looks like we've narrowed down to our element. So what I'll do is I'll try to copy over this, and if we just replace this in our code here. So this one uses an XPath, and I'm just using a CSS selector instead. And it looks a lot more shorter, it's more readable. And so yeah, so wherever you don't have the need to recognize elements by text, or maybe even go up the DOM to parent elements, it's a good practice to use CSS instead of XPath. So there are a lot of elements that we could refactor in this way. So it looks like most of them are using name attributes, which can easily be replaced by CSS, except for these maybe, because this is going up with the dot symbols for getting to the parent. Right.
Okay. Can I add something, please? Yeah. The parent selectors I would use as a parent element, not even admin field control. If you will open a page, can I go back to the page? Can you search for, yeah, this? If you will, sorry for stealing this. I usually like to use more yes, this one. I usually like to specify context for all elements if that's possible. So this attribute code belongs to advanced attribute properties for product attribute, and this is kind of own form on a page. So it belongs, this field belongs to the whole collapsible top. So when I'm trying to build a selector, I'm trying to build first selector for whole collapsible panel, and then inside this collapsible panel, I would find the proper element. So in this case, I can see there is a data index called advanced field set, which makes sense because it is called advanced attribute properties. So I would build this CSS selector like this first. So I'm selecting the whole advanced property collapsible panel, and then inside I would pick the, where is our field? Global data. Inspect. And then I will use the name attribute and input and the name attribute. So with this kind of selector, when you read this selector, you even understand the context for this element. So you narrow down the possibility to find any other similar selectors, because you know that this belongs to advanced field set and nothing else will make this different. Because sometimes it happens when you have under same full form but different collapsible panels, you can have same input with the same name attribute, but they belongs to different entities or different sections, whatever. So it is always better to first get the whole form selector, and then you get the input section. Yeah, that is it.
All right. Let's look at one more example from the admin product grid pagination section. So again, here you see this huge hierarchy of of elements listed in these selectors. So let's see if we can refactor one of them per page option. See, I think I have to go back to the pagination. I think it should be in this one. So it looks like this one has, well, there's a label, there's a parameterization and for the button. So in this case, if you look inspect this DOM here, you'll see these list elements which have buttons inside of divs, and it follows the same structure. So let's try building this selector out. So in this case, since we are matching using text, we want to parameterize the selector to be able to pick any of these values from the list. We can rely on this text for the button, and in this case, let's try using XPath. So, going to do text equals 20. So this is giving me the needed button. However, it may not be. It looks like this could end up matching multiple elements at some point because it's very loosely matching the needed element. So I would try to add some more information to this to make sure it's a little more robust. Let's see. Right, so let's look at this one. So as Alex said, it's good to look at the entire form and identify elements. So let's try using this one. Div class to right. So we could use this instead of this extremely lengthy selector. Replace double quotes by single quotes. And I will parameterize this with label or maybe value. And text. Right, so these are some of the examples that we saw. These are ways to we refactor and make these elements a little more concise and more readable, and this would end up being a little less of a hassle to go and maintain them at a later point in text. So yeah, if you have any questions, so let us know. Alex, do you have anything to add?
Not as of now.
All right. Any questions?
Navar, Andy, Bogdan, do you have any questions to us?
All right.
Yeah, there is one message. No questions.
Okay.
I don't know if it's good or bad, but still, you are very welcome to join MFTF Slack channel. Ask any questions there. Ping anybody from this meeting room directly. Ask any questions. We will be gladly to help you anytime.
Right, and there's just one last thing. We have documentation available for test writing best practices in DevDocs. So we have a topic called selectors here. Try and read up whenever you have the time. So if you scroll like down, you see some CSS examples here. You could use this as a cheat sheet when you're trying to build selectors. It's um, a good set of examples and usages of exported CSS is listed here with some do's and don'ts with examples of what to avoid and what to use. All right, that's all from.
Yeah, actually, I have a question from Adarsh Malikhan. How to check text is present which has quotes? So if you want to see some text with quotes, you will have to use HTML special characters, which will translate your quotes into HTML special characters. It will look like this in XML, but when we're gonna generate the paths, we're gonna convert them into proper quotes, and you will be able to verify such kind of text. And the other question is the text selector case sensitive. I think he's asking about XPath text element. Yes, all XPath text selectors, they are case sensitive, and if you want to make it case insensitive, you can Google XPath text case insensitive. There's a lot of documentation about how XPath works with this, so you can check it there. But I wouldn't suggest you to use this text selector if you have other choices. If you want to check something, use C or wait for text or any assert we have, but try to avoid using text as much as possible.
Yeah, XPath is really powerful and really flexible, but it also gives you plenty of tools to write bad code, sadly. So it's kind of it's an art.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right then. If there are no questions, we will wrap up for today. Thanks for joining. I hope this was helpful. See you on the next best practices meeting. Thanks. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Did you kill the recording?
I think I just canceled the blue jeans. I hope it would stop, right?
It says that it's still recording.
Yeah.
Oh.
You need to stop recording.
No. Yeah, go for it. Come on back in and hit stop recording if the button's available.
No, it's not.
Okay. Yeah, I think if you kill the meeting and you kill it and you kick everybody out, I think it should be good.
Looks like.
If you do like end call and end call for everyone else.
Join the meeting.
Yeah.
Sorry?